brittle, baked by a sun that spared nothing, not even the breath of the wind. Dusk poured its copper light over the desert floor, where silence held the world hostage, broken only by the sharp, trembling cry of a baby. A woman lay in the dust, her hair tangled with grit, her skin pale and fevered, her breath shallow like smoke on the edge of dying. Around her lingered the ghost of cruelty, the memory of hands that cast her down, voices that had judged her unworthy, a child they would not claim. Her name was Clara Mayfield, and though she was only 30, sorrow had carved her face into something older. In the town, she had been a specter of whispers, the woman with a secret swelling in her belly, the one who dared bring forth life without a ring or a man's proud claim. The good women crossed the street when she passed. The men's eyes narrowed, then slid away, each whisper heavier than the last. When the baby came, they turned their backs entirely. That day in the dusty road, a rough hand had seized the tiny bundle and flung it onto the ground as though it were refuse, a curse made flesh. Clara had reached for her child, but hunger, shame, and exhaustion dragged her into the dirt beside it. He came upon them like a shadow cast long by the setting sun. Jedediah Holt, Jed to those who knew him at all, was a rancher whose silence was his armor. At 35, his face bore the weather of countless seasons, the lines around his eyes not of laughter but of endurance. He was not a man of many words, but of steady labor, the kind that built fences, broke horses, and carved out life against the indifference of land and sky. Jed saw the baby first, a child no more than weeks old, lying in dust where no creature should be left. The tiny chest lifted weakly, grit sticking to damp skin where tears had fallen. Something in him stopped. He slid from his saddle, the leather groaning as boots struck the earth. He crouched, broad hand brushing dirt from the infant's cheek with a gentleness that seemed foreign on such callous palms. Then he gathered the child close to his chest, with a tiny heart beat fast against his shirt. The townsfolk who lingered scoffed. Someone muttered, "Fool rancher. Doesn't he know what she is?" But Jed did not glance their way. His voice, low and steady, carried just enough for all to hear. "Both are mine now." The words fell into the air like iron nails hammered into wood. No one dared answer him. He turned to Clara then, her body limp in the dirt, lashes fluttering with the barest thread of consciousness. Without ceremony, he lifted her, light as a bundle of sticks from weeks of hunger, and laid her across his saddle. The child rested against his chest as he mounted again, reins in one hand, fragile life in the other. The horse's hooves thudded softly on the road as Jed carried them away, the sound fading into the deep silence of desert dusk. The journey stretched into shadow. The sky deepened to indigo, and stars pricked through one by one. Clara stirred faintly, her head resting against the rough leather of the saddle. The baby whimpered, and Jed bent his head just enough to hush it, the sound soft, protective. Clara, in her haze, felt the motion of the horse, the rhythm of hooves like a heartbeat carrying her from exile to someplace unknown. The grit of dust clung to her lips, the smell of horse sweat and leather filling her lungs, but beneath it all was a strange, unearned safety. When at last they reached the ranch, the land spread wide and quiet, broken by the outline of a weather-beaten cabin and a barn standing against the night. Jed carried Clara in. The days that followed stretched long and quiet, stitched together by the rhythm of labor and the fragile cries of a child. Clara woke each morning to the smell of wood smoke and the sound of Jed's boots across the porch, steady as the turning of the earth. The cabin's walls creaked with wind, the air smelled of hay and horses, and though she still carried the weight of shame on her shoulders, she found her hands filling with work, hauling water, mending clothes, learning to tend the chickens that scratched in the dust. The baby, Rosalie, brought life to every corner, her laughter fragile but insistent, pulling Clara's spirit forward each time despair threatened to pull her back. Yet silence clung to her. Each time Jed returned from the fields, dust clouding his boots, his shirt damp with sweat, Clara braced for the judgment she believed would one day fall. But none came. He spoke little, only enough to guide, to offer, to share the bread he baked himself. Still, she felt the town pressing against her even here, invisible but heavy, their whispers riding the wind across the miles of scrubland. She imagined them standing in their doorways, shaking their heads. The rancher keeps her. Doesn't he know her shame? Her first venture into town carved the truth sharper. The general store smelled of coffee beans and tobacco, but the air inside thickened when she stepped through. Women's hands froze on fabric bolts. Men's eyes narrowed with something colder than curiosity. Clara's knees threatened to buckle, shame burning her skin. Then Jed entered behind her, shoulders square, gaze steady. He took the list from her trembling fingers and paid without flinching, the coins ringing like quiet defiance against the counter. His presence silenced the room more than any speech could. They walked out together, Clara clutching Rosalie close, and though the whispers still burned her back, she felt, if only faintly, that she was no longer alone in the fire. Clara's knees shook, but something rose in her that had never risen before. She stepped forward, her dress ash-stained, her hair wild with smoke. Her voice trembled, yet it carried into the night. You may cast me aside. You may curse my name, but you will not take my child, and you will not break the hand that gave us shelter. The silence that followed trembled like a drawn bowstring. For the first time, shame loosened its grip. For the first time, she stood unbowed. Jed moved beside her, placing his arm gently around her shoulders, not as a claim, but as a shield. The men shifted, unsettled by their defiance, and one by one they turned, their shadows swallowed by the desert night. The fire consumed the barn, but the ranch still stood. Clara, coughing, eyes streaming, felt something bloom inside her. Not fear, but dignity. In the days after, the barn was rebuilt board by board. Neighbors who had once whispered, now turning their eyes away from Jed's steady hammer and Clara's willing hands. Life continued, harsher, but somehow clearer. Clara understood at last that shame was never hers to carry. It belonged to those who had thrown her down. Jed never spoke of that night, but when their hands brushed over Rosalie's small fingers, there was no longer distance, only quiet understanding. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the desert horizon, Rosalie took her first steps across the dirt floor of the cabin. Her tiny arms stretched out, and she reached not for one, but for both of them. Clara and Jed's hands met in the space between, their fingers clasping around the child's with an unspoken promise. No vows, no declarations, only the undeniable shape of a family, born not of law or blessing, but of survival, kindness, and the courage to stand against scorn. And if you ask the land what it remembers, it will tell you this, that the desert does not bloom by thunder or flood, but by the steady drip of water finding its way into cracks. That night taught us all,